Welcome back. I am so excited for you to listen today. I have a special interview with Miriam Bouve, and I've actually known her for a decade. It might be more than a decade. I can't remember for sure, but for at least a decade.
Yeah.
She's actually the twin sister of my best friend. I'm going to let Miriam talk about herself, but I just want to say a few things first. She's a previous pelvic floor physical therapist and is now a chronic pelvic pain and mind body coach. And in 2020, I'm not sure how much I've talked about this on the podcast actually, but in 2020, I had my second baby and right when the pandemic hit, March 2020. And that was one of the lowest points for me. And I historically have been somebody who's not asked for help, who has powered through, who has tried to do it alone. And that year I reached out to Miriam and I said, like, I need support. I want support. And I actually hired her. And it was a beautiful, beautiful experience. One of the things that we did together, which I'm not even sure to what extent you do this today, but I'll share. I had my first labor and delivery was not what I envisioned, not what I hoped for. And I still had just some sadness about it. So Miriam guided me through an experience where we basically rewrote that in my mind and on my timeline. And I have felt so much different when I reflect back about it now. There's not that emotional charge anymore. And I'm just so grateful for you and so happy that you're here today so I can share you.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much. Healing birth is one of the things I'm most passionate about. It's where life begins, of course. So when life begins in another way for a mother too. And so to hold space for you and other women in that way, it's really important to me.
Thank you. Yes. Tell me a little bit about who you are. Tell everybody about who you are.
Yeah. So I'm Miriam. It's so funny that we met through my twin sister, Kate, who's so dear. So she's like one of the most special people in the world to me. But who I am, I'm a previous physical therapist, pelvic physical therapist. And now through a bit of a journey, I now am a chronic pelvic pain and by mind body coach. So I help those primarily with chronic pelvic pain, but also chronic anxiety. And really any chronic pain or emotional pain, I tend to focus on pelvic because I find it holds more meaning and more vulnerability. That's what I tend to focus on. But yeah, I work virtually now with people throughout the world doing work versus when I was a bit more limited as a pelvic physical therapist. And it's a really incredible way that helps people heal pain without a structural approach.
Yes. I can't wait to hear more about it. I'd love to hear about your journey, where you were at before doing personal development and inner work and what led you here and where you are now. Of course, I'll chime in with lots of questions.
I know before we hopped on, I was thinking about it and I was like, wow, that feels like a world ago. It feels so long ago. And it wasn't even that long ago. So I want to say, yeah, it was right before COVID. I remember probably the year before COVID, there was just a lot hit me. I would constantly switch jobs every couple of years because I felt like it was the job that wasn't making me happy. And I felt like if I just changed the job or if I moved houses, that would make things better. So I lived in Philly at the time, Philadelphia, which I spent most of my adult life. And I remember I went for just a primary care appointment and I thought that it was just seasonal depression. And this was again before I did any healing work, which I now look at all of it very differently. He's like, oh, I think it just sounds like anxiety. I was working so much. I think so many people can relate to this. I kind of dreaded going to work, not because of the work. I loved my work. It was the hours. It was like the intensity. And then I would get home from work and I would just be exhausted and I would eat dinner and I would lay on the couch just being totally exhausted. And then I would get up and be like, oh, I'm going to have to do this over again. I dreaded my life. I adored my husband. I adored where I lived. Like so much of the physical was in place or it seemed like it. And so anyways, he was like, it sounds like anxiety, which to me felt like it was this message that there was something more wrong with me than the way that I lived, or about society. But it felt like I just needed to work on this issue. And if I worked on it enough, then I would be happy in my job, essentially. Does that make sense how I'm saying
it
that?
Does. Yeah. I'm following
and
you.
I remembered I was learning a lot about this concept of acceptance. And I was like, well, I just need to accept this job. I need to accept that this is where I'm at, which ultimately I did.
Yeah.
But I learned also in the process that acceptance was knowing when to leave too.
Yes.
Acceptance is knowing when to say when to leave, you know?
Can I pause
Anyways,
you right
yeah.
there? I
Yeah.
just have a feeling that somebody listening is going to be in that exact spot right now. If she is, what advice do you have for her? Or even just speaking from your own, like, how did you distinguish between accepting what is and knowing, wait a second, actually, I do need to leave?
I skipped over this. My doctor prescribed me anti-anxiety medication.
Okay.
And I was talking to a friend about it. I just felt like it wasn't the right thing for me. I felt like maybe it would delay what I really needed to face within myself. And that's not for everybody. I felt it would just delay it. That's when I started my healing process at the time. I started working with a therapist and another healer. And she said to me, you could be here in 5 years saying the exact same thing. It's funny. I even just felt it in my throat. I was like,
I heard it.
oh my gosh, I could be complaining about the exact same thing for 5 years from now. So we could maybe talk about this, but I also use my menstrual cycle too and watch what comes up every month. And a lot of times I think we're taught, oh, you're just PMSing. Whatever's coming up is just your PMS.
Yeah. Right.
And to me, how I know the difference is when something keeps cycling back up over and over and over again. And it might not be as intense as leaving, although I think sometimes it might be, but this thing needs attention. It means that this thing really needs attention. And so I think there's more nuance to life than just like leaving or staying, you know?
Yeah.
So does that answer? Does that make sense how I'm saying that? Yeah. I think our souls have a way of not letting us off the hook, essentially. And I'll talk about that when it comes to pain too. I feel that our souls have a way of communicating to us through discomfort, through pain, whether it's physical or emotional pain, to really try to wake us up and show us something. Because I really think that our souls are trying to get us to evolve and to live a life that actually feels good. I don't think we're meant to be miserable all the time. And so if we are in that constant state, it's happening for us. It's happening to show us something so that we don't keep ignoring it. After I chose not to take anti-anxiety medication, it was like this very odd timing that I won't overly get into my personal story, but I started my own healing work and it wasn't even intentional, oddly enough. I'm sure it was my deeper subconscious that was intentional, that was working for me. But yeah, I started working with a therapist and another healer, and she's the one that asked me, like, you could be here 5 years from now. But I also overlapped too with just feeling unsatisfied with how I was treating my patients as well. I worked at one of the most highly respected places in Philadelphia for pelvic physical therapy. And I remember I would just spend like so many weekends getting more and more trainings, thinking if I just got this other training, I would be able to help this person's suffering. And I would just keep certain patients on the top of my head of like, well, if I just got this other training, like that will help that person. And it just got to the point where I remember I was with one patient in particular, and I was doing internal treatment. If people aren't familiar with pelvic physical therapy, we do internal work. And she started crying, which wasn't crazy uncommon. A lot of people would try to hold it back, which to me was part of what the body actually wanted to release and was actually begging to release something more emotional. I think a lot of times patients come into the medical world not realizing that they actually are searching for more emotional healing. Anytime you're uncomfortable in your body, there's such an emotional component to it. And literally the physical pain and emotional pain is processed at the same place in the brain. So I think not only did patients weren't conscious of desiring that, but also as a physical therapist, I wasn't trained in that. I mean, I intuitively, I would know how to hold people, or I felt like I would, but not to necessarily help them through it or help them out of it.
Right.
It's funny. And I still feel this way. That's why I regret a bit in some ways of going to physical therapy school, because I remember wishing I could just sit with all of my patients and just talk with them about what was really going on. I remember just thinking that like I could just sit and talk with these people and I want to like learn all about their lives, which is so funny because even when I say it, I realize this is not what I do.
Yeah.
Again, like underneath, like our souls are really, you know, they're guiding us. Very shortly after that, it was the hardest leap I took. I'm sure maybe you can relate to this. I quit my job. I tried to save up a lot. I was so scared. And I didn't know exactly what it looked like, but I felt like I also needed a little bit of a break to figure it out. And I don't want to get too far into the story because I went back to school for marriage and family therapy and I didn't graduate. I intentionally didn't graduate, but that led me into this world of somatic healing, which I spent a big part of many of my years doing as more somatic work and combining it with a certain type of pelvic energy healing. That to me is part of what we did together. And that has
that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's beautiful, beautiful work. it very much has influenced so much of my work today. But now I've taken that and I've taken it into more specific pain reprocessing therapy and other work that is actually very research driven. We have proven research to show how much it helps chronic pain, including pelvic pain.
I
Yeah.
love how much you've allowed yourself to evolve, because you even had a moment where you're like, I kind of regret going, but probably you had to have that experience for your soul to know, wait a second, it's not this, but it's close to this. I have moments where I'm like, okay, I'm an IO psychologist by training, a psychologist for the workplace, but really I don't want to talk about work that much.
Well, and tell me if this is true with you too. There's something that feels acceptable about doing healing work in a certain framework, whether it's like for work or in physical therapy. I don't know if it's more accepted on some level. Well, we used to think it was. Our inner child felt like we had to do it a certain way.
Yeah, I can relate for sure. And I'm so happy that you've just allowed yourself to evolve, because there are so many women who would stay stuck because, well, I paid for this doctorate, and so I'm going to do this. I don't want that to be a quote unquote waste. Or, well, I started this. I'm sorry, what program were you going to?
Oh, marriage and family therapy.
Marriage and family. I was like, I'm missing a word there. And I don't want that to be a waste. I've interacted with so many women like that. And it's like, what if you just let yourself to take the next right step? And there's no way for me or for you or for them to predict Z of where I'm going to get, and to be able to map that out. We got to take one step, feel into it, take another step, feel into it.
There's so much I could just say about that.
Go for it. If anything's coming to mind.
I just want to just say that it's like, it can be confusing and lonely and really dark at times because you're so in the middle of it. And yet it's still the only way. It is the only way, because our minds want to feel like we have everything figured out, but we can't.
I couldn't agree more. It's so common to get stuck in that. And what if you just let yourself evolve in whatever way your soul is calling? So you've done a lot of healing work at this point, and I would love to hear personally what shifted for you, and then how that's shifted things in your business too, and in terms of the way that you're working with clients and anything else that feels relevant there.
It all intertwines, and it's so funny. We could be here for days probably talking about that just alone, but when you do healing work, it shifts your entire reality. It literally shifts your entire reality of what's possible. And I think that is one of the biggest things, is that you think that what is possible is this much. And then each time you do healing work, you shift not only your beliefs, but your trust in life. And then something gets bigger, and then it keeps happening. So for me, I was so scared. And, I think we all have a different financial situation coming into, life. I took out $300,000 in student loans. And I say that because to tell people that we all have a different level of how far we've gotten in debt. And I say that to give ourselves permission, because it was one of the things, and I punished myself for it. I was like, you did this. You have to stay in this job. You have to do it this way to get student loan forgiveness, to blah, blah, blah. Anyways, these rules that we put on ourselves.
Yeah.
We put so many rules on ourselves that are mostly subconscious, probably. And to me, that's what healing work is leaning into the subconscious and thinking, is this actually a rule?
Am I creating this for myself? It's usually not.
And so much of the healing work is moving through our resistance to all of it. And so one of the things that I say in my work now is that resistance is part of the condition. So if you're feeling resistance, it's because it's trying to protect you. But the more you lean into it, it really has something for you. And so when we think about just how it's shifted my life, this makes me tear up. Yeah, at the time, I didn't have any children. I wasn't strongly desiring children at the time, but I remember thinking, there's no way I can work like this and have a baby. I have no desire to come home exhausted at night and do the same thing over and over again. So I think it was a big part of my preconception journey too. And I now had a baby last year, and I think so much of it was setting up my life for the way that I truly desired to mother. And I won't get down to, that's alone a huge conversation alone,
huge
right?
Topic.
Because how much we live our lives is literally planting the seeds for the possibility that our children what our children can live in. And that's what I want to show. That's what I want to like leave. That's the legacy I want to leave to my daughter is freedom and trust and possibility. But I'd say now I have so much more permission to feel what I feel. I'm a very sensitive person. Yeah, I give myself permission to feel what I feel. And it's not that all anxiety has gone away, but it's okay to feel what I'm feeling. I live in so much more of a flow state. So when you said, I love how you let yourself evolve, I used to like fight myself and I fight my human design of like wanting to try different things and doing different things. And now I'm very connected to my body to the point where I feel like I live in ease. And if I don't feel like I'm living in ease, it's usually something that's trying to show itself to me to essentially work its way through so that I can move through that and find what's on the other side.
I don't know how much you relate to this, but something that I feel like I did constantly before starting healing work, but also throughout is fight life. When you said resistance, I resisted all the things, all the experiences, all the emotions, all the things that I didn't want to happen. And it made life feel so much harder and so much more painful. And I have gotten a lot better at not resisting. And I just, that just came up for me when you mentioned that. Is that what your experience was like too?
Yeah. And especially, and this is something we can even talk about more, I think we all have, from a nervous system standpoint, it's literally like being in fight or flight all the time. It's like we're literally fighting, but that fighting is almost like turned inward. And people like are surprised, I think, when they learn that about me. But like naturally, how I grew up is like I'm a fighter. That's how I would cope, is to fight. And so I think that I would fight myself. I spent a lot of my postpartum as fighting what was coming up in me. Yeah. And it makes life feel really challenging. And I talk a lot about that when it comes to chronic pain as well, because I have a history of chronic UTIs. That's a big part of what led me into this work too. You can feel when something uncomfortable comes up in your body. We not only like, no, this isn't happening, it can't happen, go away. Everything is fighting it. And we even hear like the language around health is like the war against, fight this. I take a very different approach now. It's also knowing what is behind the fighting. And a lot of the times there's immense anger and rage and grief and sadness. And so it's not about just don't fight. It's about learning about what's behind the fight.
Yes. I can't wait to dive into this next. I have a family member who struggles with chronic pain. And there's also a lot of emotion suppression and resistance and internally and externally not wanting experiences to happen. So although I personally don't feel drawn to like guide women and men through pain, I'm fascinated with it. And I can't wait for you to share more about the work and what you've been noticing and what you do with clients.
Pain is one of the most fascinating things to me. And for a long time, I actually didn't like working with it because I found it to be incredibly challenging. And now I actually tell people, like, if you've struggled with pain, I have a lot of like medical providers that refer to me and send them to me because now I know. You know, I'm just thinking about your family member. I think we all have a family member with chronic pain or chronic illness. And it's incredibly painful watching, especially if they're not finding answers. I think that the medical system alone is failing a lot of people. There's a lot of people who literally specialize in pain, and yet very few people are actually connected to the true research behind pain. And if you don't understand the actual origin of pain, the root cause of pain, then you can't actually treat it. Yeah. And so what we know, and this is not me just saying it from an alternative viewpoint, I think a lot of alternative treatments are beautiful, but they're not actually backed in research. And the work that I do is all pain signals come from the brain, but there's a very big difference between acute pain and chronic pain. And once pain has become chronic, it is often brain generated. I use the term TMS or neuroplastic pain. I also call it mind-body syndrome. And it's that the brain is producing this very, very real pain.
Yes.
And very few medical providers actually acknowledge that. So some people will say like, oh, it's psychosomatic or it's this and that. But the thing is, the majority of people with chronic pain have brain generated pain. I learned a little bit of this back in PT school, and it always felt like the people who would benefit from this work were like the exception. And I'm like, no, this is, even if you actually do continue to have structural damage, and I hope I'm clear because I know I talk about this
Yeah.
every day. And so this is a lot of times new information, but even if someone has structural damage, what we know is that the pain signal is modulated by the brain either way. And so the brain affects all forms of pain. So even if you're on one end where you know your pain is brain generated and it's TMS and it's neuroplastic, I just use all those terms. Even if you know that your pain is coming from your brain, that can be easier because you have less resistance. But let's say you're on the other end and you've been told a million times that your pain is coming from this part of your body, from something being wrong, from an MRI, from this, from that. Let's say that might be the case. We know that the brain is what is modulating those pain signals. So this work helps everybody. But I will say most of the time with chronic pain, once it's become chronic, the actual reason you've been told that it is causing your pain in your body is not the root cause. It might be going on still, but it's not actually what's causing your pain.
I'm glad that you talked about the two ends as well, because sometimes when people hear this, they're like, no, I'm not making it up. And I'm like, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. I've had that kind of response and not what I'm saying. And we can also see in the body that there can be two people, both with a herniated disc, for example, or something that is inside of them structurally, abnormal. I put that in quotes. And one of them experiences chronic pain and the other doesn't. Yeah, there's something else going on. What else would you want listeners to know?
I want to give the biggest reason why this happens. I want to reinforce anybody who says that your pain is not real or it's all in your head. It's incredibly invalidating and painful. And I'd say that actually makes pain worse when you feel so invalidated, which I think a lot of people have at some point, or not understood or not empathized with. One of my teachers will say that the pain isn't in your head, but the solution isn't in your body. And that might take a second to have that really land. But the point is saying that the pain is real, but the solution, we have to go to the root cause, which is a lot of times that it's being formed in the brain. And that doesn't mean that your pain is any less real. And that's what's so fascinating about this world is like, we think that to be validated in what we're feeling in our body, that we have to have like something structurally going on, like below the neck. And we can say that there's something going on above the neck that is creating that. But to get to the point of why it happens, and I think this is what's so fascinating, and it's changed like how I look at my entire life and those that I work with. The pain is produced because the brain's number one goal is to keep you safe and to feel that it's protecting you. So the brain is looking at your system as a whole. The brain will create very real pain signals and physical symptoms, so many chronic physical symptoms, in order to distract you from your deepest emotional pain in your subconscious. It does that because it feels that your deepest emotional pain is a greater threat than any physical challenge that you have, any sensation in your body. On a simple note, it provides this incredible distraction from feeling, because we have been taught that feeling is incredibly dangerous to ourselves. And in some ways, certain times in our life, it was, right? If we think about your deepest shame, which we all have shame, like we all have rage that we couldn't feel, that it was literally too unsafe to feel it. So
yes. But I'm familiar with this research. So I'm probably not the best person to ask, but yes.
Yeah.
And connected when I was saying, like there's a lot of emotion suppression that this family member does not want to feel, although the individual probably thinks there's a lot of feelings all the time, the deeper stuff.
That's what people will say, like, oh, it's not stress or it's not emotional pain. It's all subconscious though. And there's ways to tell a lot of times if you do have TMS, booking a call with me, or there's a certain quiz you can almost take. But one part of it is having a lot of emotional pain from even childhood, or even not just trauma, but anything that felt like a threat. There's just a lot of different ways to tell someone if you likely have TMS or neuroplastic pain. But a lot of the times it's not on the top of our minds, which is causing our pain. And that's the point. It's the point because our brains are doing a really good job at pushing it down.
And tell me, my understanding is that, especially when with TMS, it moves. So for instance, if a nerve block is done on one particular part of the body, like let's say the lower back, then suddenly the chronic pain might be somewhere else, like the knee.
I love those questions because and it's what would drive me crazy as a PT is that I didn't understand it. Like my brain would just go crazy trying to understand some of these cases. I say cases, like I mean people, but There's something called the symptom imperative. And I think it's fascinating. When I learned about this, I was like, oh my God, it helps so much make sense. And so what happens is that you see this a lot of the times in our work, but even in those not doing this work, is that something will be healed or something will start to, or an emotion might come up and start to be felt. The brain will do something called a symptom imperative and create another symptom. It adds kind of a last ditch effort to protect you from feeling what you feel. So a lot of times when people start working with me, we do some really powerful work together. Their symptom improves. And then this other thing that maybe it's happened before, a lot of times it's a new symptom that they've never felt before. And they're like, what? It's the brain. Yeah, the brain, again, trying to create a symptom to distract you from feeling what's really there. And we could talk more about how you engage, so you can engage with it. And that's what those that are working with me do, is that we get to say, like, it's just TMS, but what might this be protecting me from feeling? What might this be protecting me that's so painful for me to feel? And without that curiosity, a lot of times we can't find deeper healing. But once we do, it opens up so much, and it lets everything that we've been pushing down and in come in and out. And it's not an easy process, but it's one that's worth it for sure.
So worth it. So worth it. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but if I had to choose between feeling all the things or living in chronic pain, I would pick feeling it because we can handle it. I hear clients say, I don't know if you hear this from yours as well, but I don't want to open Pandora's box. I don't know what I'm going to find. And I just remind them, like, what you're going to find in there is an oxygen tank, is love, is everything that you've wanted. It's all the fears and the insecurities and everything, the defensiveness that has been getting in the way. And you just get to let go of all of that.
I know underneath it all really is that, in our purest form, in our purest state, it is all there,
love.
And I think this is like the most beautiful part, is like a lot of the times what we're meeting first is really painful, but we think that by pushing it down is what makes us feel it less, but it's actually what makes us feel it more.
Yes.
When we resist and we push something down, it's making it stay there longer. Energy wants to move. Emotional energy wants to move. So when we let it move, that's when the relief actually happens. Sometimes immediately, sometimes with time. So I just tell people it takes energy to push it down. It takes energy to avoid it. And people might be like, how? And I'm like, oh, well, pain.
Anxiety, rumination.
Anxiety, yes. It's all the same.
Rage. I mean, all the things.
Exactly. All of it is taking energy to push it down. Relationship issues, when we actually go into it, even after one session, so many people are like, I'm surprised I feel peace after this. I hear that almost every day. Is that I'm surprised I feel peace after feeling this intensity of whatever I'm feeling.
That's the release. Thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want listeners to know or understand about this work?
I think this is the wave of the future, actually. It's already happening. Once you start to learn about it, you see it everywhere. I think medicine is completely changing. So it sounds like something that's somewhat new. Work was created by Dr. Sarno in the 1980s, and it's just evolved since then. I would say it's becoming a lot more common now, but it's going to completely change medicine. Yeah, I would say the majority of people, a lot of times people think that they're the exception. And once structural issues have been ruled out, and we could talk more about that if somebody's interested in a clarity call as well. But what we find is that the research shows the majority of chronic pain is neuroplastic, besides the very, very small exception. And so if you are wanting to heal physical pain, this is a lot of the times the solution. A lot of the times is. And I think the last thing I just wanted to leave is that chronic pain isn't any different in many ways than anxiety or depression. It's all sensation in the body. And again, it's all distracting us from feeling what we truly want and need to feel in order to, like we said, release, in order to move or to heal, to move our way through it. There is so much possibility out there. If you've been in the medical world and you've tried so much, this is a lot of times the deeper answer. And we didn't even have time to really get into like, what is it that I actually really, really do, which is a combination of brain retraining and brain rewiring and emotional processing work. But especially if you've had a history of feminine trauma or pelvic or feminine pain, a lot of the times it needs even extra just care and softness. For example, we've talked about your birth. These are really meaningful moments in our lives that have been harmed. It deserves to be processed, whether it's birth, whether it's something related to our sex or sexuality, whether it's related to loss. It deserves to be honored. It deserves to be felt. You deserve to have it heard.
Thank you so
So
much.
much.
If somebody is listening and she has been feeling broken, whether that is physically or emotionally, what advice would you have for her?
Try to close your eyes and try to let that feeling of what you're feeling, try to let it come up instead of trying to distract yourself and push it down. Let it come up and see what might be underneath that. And even if it's just staying with the sensation of it, which might be new for a lot of people, to let that sensation actually let it feel like it can grow. And know that the answer is acknowledging it first, as I would say, first acknowledging it, acknowledging that there's pain here, and then that it deserves to be processed. It deserves to be stayed with so that in time it can actually move.
Yeah. And if somebody heard you say the sensation, can you elaborate a bit more on that? Like dull, sharp, but just.
That's how we actually know we're feeling something, any emotion, any physical sensation. And so when we say, yeah, sensation, it's exactly what you said. It can be dull, sharp, hot, cold, prickly, tingly. It's all sensation. And when we see it that way, we can actually say to our brains, oh, this is actually safe to feel. I'm actually safe to feel that. And when we send a message of safety and we start to see life through a lens of safety, all those nervous system responses, all those pain signals no longer have to keep firing because your brain doesn't need to keep protecting you, essentially, if you feel safe. And if that feels hard, know that it's important to work with somebody because it means that there's a lot of times a disconnection from the body if it feels like you can't do that.
Yeah.
So even acknowledging that you can't feel is a feeling. I like to tell people that.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. So many people have cut off sensation below the neck, below the head. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So there's some people who can
glad.
feel really more easily, and there's some people where it takes time. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with you, even if you
normal, common, and it doesn't have to be like that. If listeners want to find you, what is the best way for them to find you?
Both my Instagram and my website is Mind Body Mirror. So just Mind Body MIR. My full name is Miriam, and on mindbodymirror.com, you can book a clarity call if you'd like. And we can talk about your pain history. We can help you make sense of what's going on and see if it would feel helpful to work together. It's probably the best way.
Thank you. I will also link that in the show notes so you can just click right from there. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much, Steph. You're doing really incredible work out there.
Thank you. You too.